Welcome to the meeting of the Skills, Economy and Growth Scrutiny Commission, to all our guests in our virtual room and to everyone watching it online. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed now. If anyone's virtual, please can you keep all your microphones on mute throughout the meeting. This will prevent audio feedback. Doesn't look like we have it all virtual. It's not in the meeting at the moment. If you're still getting feedback, please turn off nearby devices. If you'd like to speak, raise your hand to get my attention. State your name and affiliation before you make a comment. The chat function must not be used to have conversations with other participants or to provide personal information. All chat is recorded. Please only use the chat function to alert me that you wish to speak, to raise points of order or to report tech problems. This is a formal meeting of Hackney Council. Please note the press may be in attendance. The rights of the press and the public to record and film the meeting will apply. So welcome, I'm Councillor Claire Potter and I'm the Vice Chair of this Commission. We have apologies from Councillor Lynch and Councillor Billington. Have we got any other apologies? So I'd like to start off from my left and welcome Councillor Smith, Councillor Webb, Councillor Narcross. I'm Councillor Potter. Welcome back to Councillor Turbo-Deloff and Councillor Premru. We have officer apologies from Olive Richards, and we've also got in attendance Michael Toyer, Stephen Haynes and Councillor Nicholson. Do we have any item 2? Do we have any urgent items of business? None have come to my attention. In the absence of Councillor Billington, the Chair, I as Vice Chair will be chairing the meeting. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest in Claire? None. Okay. The substantive item, item 4, Cabinet question time with Councillor Nicholson. We have an hour and 45 minutes for this item, starting shortly, including Q&As. The order and timings for this item is as laid out, about 50 minutes approximately for presentation and then Q&A. Stephen.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, for housekeeping, I'm afraid I have to leave my phone on because I'm on call gold for the council. So if it goes off, that's what I'll be doing. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for letting us know. So, a key element of the scrutiny function is to hold the Mayor and Cabinet to account in public as part of a Cabinet question time session. In the municipal year, the Commission holds a question time session with the Cabinet and senior officers to ask questions about performance and decision making within the Council related to their portfolio areas within the remit of the Skills, Economy and Growth Scrutiny Commission. For this meeting, the Cabinet member we're holding to account is the Deputy Mayor and the Cabinet member for Housing Supply, Planning, Culture and Inclusive Economy. And we've asked Councillor Nicholson to provide information to the Scrutiny Commission about the work the Council is doing in relation to encouraging community wealth, building business models, creating a green and circular economy, and ensuring that local businesses are supported to meet the Council's objectives for these 2 policy areas. So I'm now going to hand over to Councillor Guy Nicholson. You've got approximately 15 minutes.
Great, thank you, Chair. So can I just sort of just make one slight kind of adjustment to your very kind of extensive and expansive introduction. The portfolio that I have in the Mayor's Cabinet is delivery, regeneration and the inclusive economy. So culture now sits with another councillor colleague in Cabinet, but it does still include planning. by the way. That is still very much part of the brief. Sorry, just with that.
No, but thank you for
Sorry
pointing
about
that out. That's important to know.
Yeah, the three kind of sort of pointers that you kind of helpfully share, thanks, Chair. Encouraging community wealth building business models, and I'm sure that kind of in the question and answers that will follow, we can expand a little bit on this. But I think it's fair to say that Michael on my right and Stephen on my left, you know, we've spent some time just trying to ensure that actually what we've got is a coherent definition of, if you like, well, what are those business models that deliver on community wealth building? And broadly speaking, I think it's fair to say, I'm sure Michael you agree, there's a kind of hierarchy there of, let's call them sort of kind of business models, just for the purposes of our conversation, which start with cooperatives, a cooperative business model. And work their way through to a business model that, to all intents and purposes, is a kind of a commercial shareholding business model. Now, from that cooperative business model to the last one, the shareholders model, really the primary kind of sort of difference there is about what happens to the income, the wealth that's generated through those business models. And the whole kind of sort of intention behind the community wealth building model is to try and keep that wealth as best we can within the Hackney economy, i.e. within those that are consuming as well as producing, and keep it very much as part of a circular economy, which kind of sort of reads across to some of the kind of sort of reflections on one of the other points, which was creating a green and circular economy. Talking about it from the point of view of wealth generation, and call it inclusive economy model, call it what you will. Beneath that of the sort of cooperative model, then we move into the pillars of the more perhaps traditional social enterprise model. So again, what we're still talking about is very much ownership of a business, being part of the kind of sort of, if you like, the kind of social shareholding of a business. So it is that business about making a profit, but making sure that profit is circulating within a community, within a local market. There is that halfway house, which kind of where we're perhaps talking about those smaller businesses that you find in Hackney's economy, who are commercial businesses, and they probably make no bones about that. They don't have shareholders in that sense. They may have one or two investors who tend to be, if not the business proprietor themselves, then it may be a family member, or it might be a friend or an acquaintance, rather than a kind of third-party investor. But what they do have is that very kind of clear kind of, should we call it, social ethos about doing business. So for them, it's as much about their role within the environment and the impact on the environment. And I think it's sort of worth noting that we're not just talking about the net zero carbon outcome here. Important though that is, there is a little bit more depth and bandwidth to what it is those businesses are trying to do. That links straight across to local employment, to local skills development, apprenticeships, internships, and so on and so forth. And many of those businesses, indeed, sort of smaller businesses in the borough, focus on those opportunities. As much as it may be around the kind of sort of, how can one sort of describe this? The London living wage proposition, for example, that too we would see very much as an important ingredient in the community wealth building portfolio. In itself, it isn't community wealth building, but it does make a significant contribution. So those smaller businesses, of which we've got a very significant number in the borough, who have signed up to the London Living Wage Initiative, for example, are making some contribution. Now, all of this inevitably means that there are many, many different constituencies involved in all of these different business models, putting aside what sectors they may be in, putting aside indeed the size of their respective businesses, whether they be cooperative or whether they are a smaller business in that more commercial sphere. Based on that, that kind of sort of really leads across perhaps to the last point that was being asked about ensuring local businesses are supported. Chair, the Commission may, just to remind, I'm sure you haven't forgot, the Council has sort of, to all intents and purposes, is concluding on a £2.5 million investment package, if I can describe it in that way, which has been focused and targeted on business support. And that business support has been in, indeed, some of it held in this very room, where groups of businesses have come together to listen to, call it a kind of professional development opportunity, call it a kind of sort of business development opportunity, but listening to experts from various different fields, talking about business practice and a direction of travel to take one's business. They've been very successful. There is, just as an aside, there's a kind of sort of a load of sort of kind of analysis work being undertaken, and I understand, I think, was it in March? For the evaluation report. Yeah, for the evaluation report. So in March of this year, there'll be an evaluation report about the programme as a whole, and then hopefully a sense of what kind of outcomes have been achieved and so on and so forth. But I think it must be flagged that going forward, the Council does not have access to this money. The £2.5 million, you may recall, was at the tail end of the discretionary grants programme for businesses at the end of the COVID kind of can I call it the COVID period. We had campaigned for more discretion as to how we could spend some of this grant money that was coming in from central government, and indeed we were given that discretion, so we could sort of actually start to use it in a more kind of sort of targeted way that's more relevant to the local environment. Now that funding stopped some time ago, last year, and won't be coming back. In its place, we've got a generic fund that is managed by the Greater London Authority, not by Hackney. It is not delegated down. I understand that we have an opportunity to kind of put on the table what we think it should be spent on, but we have to understand it's within a London context. It's not a Hackney specific context. And the sum of money that we do have some access to, which is some £400,000, which, when you reflect on the fact it was £2.5 million that was being invested previously, £400,000 isn't exactly a lot. That, Chair, is the government's replacement to the European funding regime that London used to enjoy, and Hackney's allocation is £400,000. Anyway, less said about all of that, probably the better. But as you can probably imagine, £400,000 is not a significant sum. And again, it has to align itself to what the Greater London Authority, the Mayor of London, is sort of targeting that wider 30 million package on as well. So we can't sort of really kind of deviate. I suppose in planning speak, we have to conform to what it is that London government are investing into through the enterprise partnership there in terms of business support. However, I've painted a bit of a depressing picture there, my apologies, but there are, of course, some opportunities there, and perhaps that's something that can be expanded on, if not this evening, then perhaps in the months ahead as that programme and that money kind of comes forward. But suffice it to say, I think the certainly anecdotally at this stage, the business support programme that officers have delivered for the council and for the local business community have been really well received and have been very successful in connecting with a business community, a small business community, and has really kind of unlocked some value across the local economy. And there's every intention to try and make everything possible work going forward under the new regime in regards to financing business support. I'm rather loath to finish on a depressing note, so if I can try and sort of finish on an upbeat sort of kind of proposition and then throw it open for how you want to take things forward. The amount of work that has been led by the newly formed Economic Development Unit, led by Michael in the council, is now really kind of bearing down on the community wealth building business model proposition and bearing down on our next steps and what those next steps could look like in terms of the wider economic development piece and how we can try and kind of encourage some of those larger corporations that do have a footprint or a base in the borough to connect with the community wealth building agenda itself. And there is quite a significant piece of work going on about partnership building, if I may describe it in that way, between these different layers within the Hackney economy. Clearly, our colleague, Councillor Carol Williams, is very much involved in the employment skills and apprenticeship brief, and that conversation is probably best placed for her to take that forward. But it clearly sits very, very, very closely with the green and circular economy and the creation of that. And indeed, I've just sort of come from an event with a major national contractor who is building some new homes for the council, for Hackney, where it was actually an apprenticeship and internship and employment sort of event where they've been there all day, just sort of engaging with residents, very much a walk-in opportunity for internships, apprenticeships, and for some job positions. And it was interesting, kind of the conversations about retrofitting, for example, and talking about that transition from gas engineer to electrical and mechanical engineering, for example, and trying to kind of prepare individuals for that transition, which is already beginning to happen. And indeed, the council is building some new homes and has started that process off in the neighbourhood, which will not be having any gas installation at all actually going into it. So already that movement is beginning to occur within the sort of the retrofitting proposition. I would suggest that the government is keen that we focused on area-based propositions. That works well for us in Hackney, and I'm sure we recall from our manifesto in May of last year, Chair, that we were talking about retrofitting all of those homes that are owned by the council. But we were also talking about a neighbourhood proposition, a project around a neighbourhood. And those conversations are now focused on a neighbourhood in and around Chatsworth Road involving that state, and looking at the idea of an area-based green circular economy proposition, which involves multiple tenure types, public institutions, as well as commercial businesses, and residents in both who may be a tenant of council, or indeed they may even be an owner-occupier of a terraced home, for example, in said neighbourhood. So just trying to shape and bring together over the coming next couple of years that area-based proposition. The government, I understand, have kind of released £6 billion, and the call must be to them to enable local government to take the lead in delivering on locally kind of tailored and designed initiatives along that line. The circular economy piece, I think I've touched upon that, and it sort of, there's some really interesting dynamics in play at a very local level, involving some businesses, local small businesses at a startup that are looking at not just sort of recycling but upcycling and reuse, and turning that into a commercialized model, which I think is really quite interesting, and using quite sort of, using 3D printing techniques as a manufacturing process. So interesting times ahead and a lot going on in the borough. I'll finish there, Chair. And then...
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. Thank you very much. I'd just like to welcome, I think we saw Councillor Race arrive to the meeting. And also I just wondered whether Michael Toyer, who's the Economic Development Manager, or Stephen Haynes, Strategic Director, Economy Regeneration and New Homes, whether you had anything to add before we go to questions.
Thank you, Chair, and I think Michael may want to come in as well. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Chair, and Michael will want to come in, I'm sure. But just building on a couple of the points that Councillor Nicholson made in relation to that wider context, I think that it's really important that we remember, and I remember because I've got the privilege of being responsible for these areas, that to make real impact in this space, it is the intersection between what Councillor Nicholson has talked about, but also Councillor Williams' portfolio around employment and skills and how we leverage that. And indeed, my wider responsibilities around new homes. So ensuring that when we come to delivering and building new homes, particularly social rent units, which is a key manifesto priority, that we are cognizant of these links. And I think to get real traction in this space, it's me and my team's been mindful of that at all times. And I think the only other thing I'd say is that there's a constant positive tension between the need for us to support large businesses and have that link and that relationship in place, but critically, the small businesses in this borough play a hugely important role. Part of the £440,000 that we've got from government, the GLA, is going into resilience. And as Councillor Smith has experienced recently with the Stoke Newington building collapse incident, small businesses are absolutely critical to that place. And their resilience is something that we need to be thinking about all the time. So it's a very small amount of money that we've got now, but our wider aspiration to support small business continues to be brought into sharp focus by things that happen all the time. So just a sort of wider point there.
Thank you, Stephen. Michael, did you want to add anything at this stage?
Yes. Just a bit more about the funding. So we only received 440,000 directly, but there's 30 million pot.
Use guys.
Thank you on this. Yeah.
There's 13 million open call pot across London, various themes within that suppliers can bid into. So I've been spending a lot of my time over the last few months engaging with potential suppliers, neighbouring boroughs, just to be part of some of those sub-regional bids to get our priorities across and try to influence those as much as possible. Now, we don't know how those chips are going to fall yet, but what I'll be doing is linking our 440,000 locally as best as possible with the outcomes of London-wide delivery to try and drag as much money towards Hackney as possible to support businesses. So it's just a slightly more kind of positive, upbeat note, which is unusual to come from me. And I'll finish there and wait for questions.
Great, lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much, all three of you. Members, have we got any questions? So, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you for that report on the on community wealth building. A big aspect of community wealth building, of course, is progressive procurement, which we link into our sustainable procurement strategy. So my question really is how have we been helping harness the power of the public pound to help ensure money circulating locally is helping to regenerate areas of the borough? Are we finding some money there that we can kind of push to sort of regenerate areas? And I know we've done some work around the identification of anchor institutions. Anchor institutions, just to explain if the public don't know, it's an organisation that's tied to its location, meaning institutions that can't move, or at least not easily. So that could include universities, colleges, theatres, the local hospital, for example, where they buy in services ultimately. So how far are we down the road with identifying some of those anchor institutions, and just broadly speaking about our progressive procurement and where that puts us, and where our sustainability strategy, procurement strategy? Do we need more work on that or not? I suppose is the question.
Shall I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. No. Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor Smith. Thank you. The read across to procurement and public sector, so council-led procurement, just to begin with, as you absolutely rightly say, yeah, something very, very relevant and very pertinent in terms of local community wealth building and indeed on the wider brief, just local economic development, the ability to be able to use that public money into it's almost like saying it's double bubble actually, you know, in terms of what hopefully that money will unlock is a service that obviously serves the community, obviously, but equally then actually at the front end we're also priming the local economy in all senses of the word. That is a good thing. The sustainable procurement strategy, as it happens, is en route for a review. If I may suggest, Chair, I mean, it's probably through one of our other colleagues, Councillor Chapman, who kind of leads on the council's sort of position and role around procurement. But it's certainly, I would suggest that you might just want to kind of perhaps just have a briefing on where that sort of procurement strategy is now going, that kind of timetable for review. The intention is to work in as much as we possibly can into basically, I must choose my words carefully, Councillor Smith, I think, because I'll probably find that procurement officers would quite rightly kind of throw their hands up in horror if I start talking about favouring one party over another in procurement speak. Yeah. But on a more serious note, it is about placing that procurement and perhaps sort of recognising, as you're rightly pointing out, that there are a range of potential suppliers of one goods or services of one description or another, and then about trying to encourage other, as we say, anchor institutions, the National Health Service being a case in point in all its various different guises, to follow the same route. That is a significant piece of work, and that comes back to the strength of the partnership building. Now, I spoke earlier about partnership with those anchor institutions, I beg your pardon, with those large corporates, forgive me. Now, interestingly, the partnership building in the council with those anchor institutions, and certainly those in the public sector, is actually forming around what we took to a recent full council, which was the strategic plan, Hackney's strategic plan, which again is delivering on, you know, the mayor's objectives, basically, that we have just are coming forward as part of this administration. So that strategic plan brings together the partnership that enables that to happen. And again, it comes back to sustainable procurement, as you're saying. So there's quite a lot of moving parts at the moment, but I think this is perhaps a great opportunity to influence and to feed into some of these strands of work, whether it's partnership development, whether it's around the strategic plan, you know, wherever it sits, it really doesn't matter, I would suggest, and certainly around the sustainable procurement strategy that the council is leading on. And suffice it to say that one of our colleagues, Councillor Palace, is a kind of member champion reporting to the mayor and to other cabinet members, and part of his brief is very much, he's sort of looking at the sustainable procurement strategy alongside that of community wealth building, and specifically around cooperative business models and social. Sorry.
Michael, do you want to put something to add to that?
Thank you. So, as Councillor Nicholson says, that the time is right now because the sustainable procurement strategy is being reviewed, and I'll engage with colleagues in procurement on it. I think just add a bit of detail. There's a bit of a kind of a process flow to go through here. So you can set the procurement rules and you can achieve some local benefit. There's no doubt about that. But to go to the next step, you need to understand the procurement pipeline and local market analysis. So are the local social organisations there in the first place to even compete for procurement? But even if they have favourable terms in the procurement assessment process, then they just might fall over from the scale of the contract and some of the risks involved. And I think a way to think about shifting the dial on procurement is it's a combination of my team, the procurement team, with the kind of guardians of the rule book. I don't mean that badly, that's their role, but the commissioning service as well. And I've had some interesting conversations with colleagues in adult social care, which is a good one as an example, because there's a pipeline of contracts, 3 to 5 year cycles. They're relatively large. So this is putting aside the Parliament's state of funding for adult social care, but the contracts are still relatively large. So there could be some traction there. But if we can identify the opportunity and the businesses, we need to wrap the business support packages around them to get them ready. And that can be a 1 year, 2 year process. So, I don't think we can promise anything overnight, but that's a flavour of the process. If we can achieve that, then we can influence our anchors. Until we get to the stage where we can say, this is how it works and we can evidence it, then we can influence them, and then maybe private sector as well with their local supply chains. That's just a flavour of the process.
Stephen, you wanted to add something there?
Just very quickly, Chair, it's a sort of slightly boring point, but it's quite important. And going back to Councillor Smith's sort of question about anchors, there's been a lot of discussion and work happening to identify how we move this forward. The challenge for London and London boroughs is that we work in particular geographies, and as opposed to someone like Preston, which is the Preston model, obviously, that we talk about a lot, as a unitary authority that has responsibilities across the health, local government, fire, police sector. In London, it's slightly different. So in terms of the health sector, NEL or wherever it might be, the geographies are slightly different. So actually getting traction is slightly more complicated. However, there's a willingness to do that. And I think we were, and we talked about it a lot, but we were interrupted by the real problem of COVID, and the discussions were happening quite intensely before that. I know they're happening again now, and I'm part of those. So I think perhaps for the Commission, it might be worth having if not a separate session, at least something around institutions, because what we need is as much traction as possible to move that agenda forward. But there's an absolute willingness across the public sector partners to do that. As Michael said, it's about identifying the areas that we can actually make progress. But it's also really important that we recognise that there's a huge role for the community and voluntary sector here as well. So we talk a lot about big institutions, but actually, again, grassroots organisations have to have a voice in that as well. So it's a sort of suggestion, Chair, that perhaps we bring this back as a separate discussion at some point, because it's critical to everything I think you're talking about tonight and moving forward.
Right, okay. Certainly no.
So just
Just
when you're doing the analysis, can we identify? Oh, sorry. When we're doing the analysis of just what you mentioned, Michael, about sort of looking at the market, see what's out there, people can go to purchase. Can we look at the potential gaps in the market as well, and how we can sort of provide opportunities within those gaps for members of our community as well? Thank you.
Absolutely. Any analysis of the gap analysis, and Councillor Palace has already been mentioned as a champion on this. It's already pointed out to me the manifesto commitments of setting up several new cooperatives where there's market failure. So this assessment will lead to that. If there's a gap, that is the place to move to.
So we've got Councillor Turbo Deloff, and then we've got Councillor Webb and Councillor Norcross in that order, and then Councillor Trevor. So let's take the questions individually for now and see how it goes. Councillor Turbo Deloff.
Thank you. Hello.
I think you should just be able to. You could just use mine and just try.
Thank you. It comes with Sonic, right? Thank you very much, Councillor Nicholson has been brilliant. This is related to business and environment, specifically to LTNs and businesses. But I'm aware as well they kind of falls into another cabinet responsibility, a cabinet member. My question is related to whether we know the impact of LTNs has on local businesses. And I'll share a very practical example. On the very rare occasions I use a car, which I haven't tried, we were before near Dalston able to park and sort of stop very quickly to buy patties. But now they're really quite busy and there's more traffic and it's difficult to stop. So in the last 2-3 times we haven't been able to do that. Now that leads me to wonder if LTNs are having an impact on businesses because people are not, because of the traffic, people are thinking about the time to get home and not being able to park, to purchase stuff, and maybe being that a loss for business. I support LTNs. I'm just really wondering whether we know if businesses are thriving or there is an impact to it. And I think it would be really good.
So could you ask the question in related to the circular economy and community wealth building, if that's
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
I don't have the evidence or the analysis, and I'd suggest, if I may, Chair, that we kind of take that away and we just find out from colleagues in environment and from Councillor Coburn just what sort of analysis is being played out. And I'm rather loath to kind of make sort of wild sort of guesses, which is all they would be this evening, about the actual impact on the ground and just quite how it's all kind of performing. What I would just say though is that Hackney is in and I would suggest it's unique and it's a fortuitous position, which is that fundamentally there's the 15-minute neighbourhood proposition going on in Hackney. And some argue that actually that was one of Hackney's sort of more sort of kind of resilient factors that meant it came through that whole COVID experience of lockdowns and so on and so forth in the way that it has managed to do so, because it is very much the local neighbourhood that got then called the 15-minute city or whatever it was. Now that clearly works well with LTNs for obvious reasons, that proximity business. And I think that where the issue I would suggest comes is more to do with the supply chain. So that's logistics, the movement of goods from A to B and so on and so forth. Where there's some sort of parallel work going on with the last mile delivery, for example, and that whole kind of proposition, again, is probably best to bring Councillor Coburn into that conversation, just about that kind of sort of that more finer grade about all of these various different shifts and changes that we're seeing. Certainly I mean, all I can say is that talking with representatives from local business associations, so Stoke Newington Church Street, for example, is a very good example, where they are kind of actually kind of sort of seeing what happened, if I may suggest, going back a little bit further, what happened on the Narrowway, when that was not an LTN at the time, but suddenly it became a pedestrianised thoroughfare rather than a road with narrow pavements. Is that actually businesses to kind of recognise that actually trade was better, turnover increased actually as a result of pedestrianisation, basically. And the LTN seems to be having exactly that effect along Church Street. So a timely intervention, I would suggest, which actually perhaps sort of counter to what some were concerned that would happen, the opposite is happening. And now it's giving an opportunity, as you know, to start talking about the introduction of a street market. Sorry, Councillor, you know all of this better than I. But, the introduction of a street market, should that Where should that be? Could that be on Church Street? And if so, which bit, and so on and so forth. And I think we're seeing more and more of that kind of sort of combination of bricks and mortar businesses along the high street coming out into the street and being able to trade and whatever their business may be. All of which I think is very good. Dalston at the moment is thriving. Hackney Central as a kind of destination is thriving. All of these places surrounded by LTNs. And I think Councillor Durbett-Dillov, you know, I think all of us were a bit sort of, whoa, you know, this is a bit radical, you know, closing down streets and so on and so forth, when we were first talking about it. But actually, it's beginning to bed in. I'm not saying that all the problems are solved, and perhaps that's a conversation for another time and another place, how we can refine it still further, make sure that what we're not doing is sort of impacting on residents' daily lives in a negative way, and that we're enabling the movement of trade and commerce to continue. And that is important, and I'm sure that with a bit of thought, the technology is there to help do.
Thank you.
Thanks for your response. Can I suggest, Tracy, that we pick this up if it doesn't fit into a meeting that's coming in the near future? We could write to Councillor Coburn and ask for an update to get a fuller answer.
Yeah.
For Councillor Turner.
Yeah,
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Webb, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Chair. We won a levelling up grant. Well done, thanks. Good work. These are aspirations of encouraging community wealth, green and circular economy. How much of a part were these aspirations in that levelling up bid?
Sorry, yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Webb. Levelling up, the Levelling Up Fund bid for Hackney Central. So it's focused on pretty clear geography, in the order of just over £19 million. And it looks at a number of themes around Hackney Central, all of which are focused on the environment and the consumer/resident. So that is about the street scene and about enhancing and improving the public realm, the urban realm, in and around the town centre. It looks at improving cultural and community kind of sort of resources and opportunities within the said town centre. That will sort of centre around cultural and social activities, but it also includes healthy eating, for example, healthy lifestyles, and creating a healthy town centre, basically, and certainly for all of those who are living and working in it and around it. And then finally into that comes the economic kind of development piece, the wider. So that's very much about sort of footfall and sort of ensuring that actually what we've got going on here is a destination of choice for residents and perhaps from people further afield, primarily on the public transport network. It's quite a broad portfolio. What it isn't is about direct business support. However, having said that, all of these factors play out with local businesses, because actually what it's doing is that it's investing into the very market space that businesses are operating within the town centre. So businesses have been involved in the preparation of the submission, the initial submission, and have indeed endorsed the submission, and are very much still part of the process. And going forward, there is more to come forward in the coming months, just about those sort of kind of ways in which spend will be kind of sort of actually executed and delivered into the town centres and into the town centre environment and its community. So there is a list of activities, but perhaps it may be best to kind of treat that as a slightly separate piece. Unfortunately, what it's not, and Michael was talking earlier about the Shared Prosperity Fund, and both the Hackney allocation of about, 450 was it? So 40, or £440,000. And the Mayor of London, the GLA's allocation of some 30 million. There's two very distinct pots of money, and it's the Shared Prosperity Fund that is going into that business support proposition. The Levelling Up Fund is really a wider brief. So it would be wrong to say that it's there to be used for business support in the way in which we've been talking about it, in the context of, for example, the £2.5 million worth of discretionary grant spend on business support activities. It's a different proposition. Hopefully what it will do is that it will take Hackney Central's economy up some steps, actually, because already it is proving to be a destination of choice for a growing number of customers and consumers, and not just those who may be working in the public sector, for example, for the council as a major employer in the town centre, but beyond that, in terms of the visitor economy, for example, as well as the more local visitor, i.e. a resident using the town centre as well. So that's really what it's designed to do. And as I said, that work will be forthcoming, and perhaps it's an opportunity for the Commission to kind of look at it perhaps as a standalone item, just because of the significance of it, really.
Thank you.
Stephen, you wanted to add?
Sorry, Tim.
Thanks, Chair. And just in terms of Councillor Webb's question about community wealth building, whatever definition that we use, whether it's the ones we've discussed, whether it's via Google or be ChatGPT, which I think now is the place to go for information, it always talks about community resilience as being a core pillar of community wealth building. And actually, one of the three key priorities of the Levelling Up bid was indeed about improving well-being and resilience in Hackney Central. And
as I said,
well, no, not at all.
Yeah.
And actually, while it isn't direct business support, it's absolutely about supporting markets. It's absolutely about bringing empty spaces and shops back into use, and actually increasing footfall, which has a number of benefits, not only in terms of the local economy, but actually in terms of improving community safety. So it's in the round where that sort of benefit exists, I think, as well. So thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Norcross, would like to ask your question? Middle Council.
Thank you. Yeah, so you were talking about kind of London living wage employers and kind of even at that kind of sort of commercial end of that sort of spectrum, you talked about the importance of businesses paying the London living wage. I was just wondering, if you're seeing a change in the number of businesses who are doing that, particularly in this sort of slightly difficult economic times. And I was just wondering what work the council is doing to support businesses who, want to keep paying the London living wage, even if it's becoming a little bit more difficult for them, or, businesses who are maybe, deprioritising that amongst all of their other sort of rising costs, and what sort of support is there for that?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Norcross. I mean, Hackney's actually been performing. Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, thanks, Councillor Norcross. Hackney certainly Hackney's economy and that community of smaller businesses have been sort of signing up and joining up, obviously voluntarily. It is obviously a voluntary kind of sign up in terms of the London living wage. It's not statutory, let's say. And that is still the case. So what we're seeing is not actually a decline in terms of those businesses who may be withdrawing from the scheme. At the moment, they are remaining fixed, and by all accounts, numbers are still very much kind of sort of on the up rather than on the down. And I think that's the sort of kind of a testament actually to perhaps the Hackney culture, if I could describe it in that way. The environment in which we're all living, culturally speaking, is such that actually it's seen as a very important kind of sort of thread. And what was interesting was that, I mentioned earlier on, Councillor Norcross, that there comes from a kind of project with a kind of a national company that is involved in Hackney and in contract with the council to build some new homes. And indeed, they too were talking about it. Their main really their kind of business operations as a company. They are a large company. It's basically within the M25, so they're across both the capital and beyond. But nevertheless, it's sort of they're kind of London and the South East centric, I think is the best way of describing it. And from their perspective, it's a very important piece of kind of sort of, you know, they see it very much as an important piece of sort of social value, and not just for them, but as a company, but obviously for those who are in receipt of it and perhaps starting their careers in that particular sector. All of it comes into play, and it's sort of, and that was great to hear. But actually, it's the smaller businesses who come along, sign up, and they may be employing a very small number of individuals, but that doesn't really matter. I think it's that statement and that intent and delivering on that intent. So the council continues to encourage and promote the London living wage, and it has no intention to stop doing that. I'm not sure what the target might be, Councillor Marcross, so I'm not going to kind of sort of say, by this time. But hopefully that's it's reassuring, if nothing else. Yeah.
Michael, would you like to add?
Oh, sorry, Michael.
Yeah, just to add to that for the facts and figures people. So the shift between 2021 and 2022, when it was last done, was a 36% increase. And just to echo what Councillor Nixon was saying, this is like this is emblematic. So it shifted to a total of 205 accredited businesses. So of course there are many organisations across the borough paying London living wage and more most likely, but they're not accredited. So it's good to have the accreditation as a proxy. So a 36% increase in that year is extremely positive. And we're not having businesses come to us saying that they're struggling to pay. They're struggling with everything cost-wise. And this isn't coming from a social angle, but lots of businesses are saying they kind of have to pay it now because, certainly in hospitality, because of competition for labour, because there's a labour shortage, and the independents, in particular, I had a conversation just the other day with a landlord saying they pay living wage because they believe in it, but if they didn't, they wouldn't get the staff anyway.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course you can.
That was already good to hear. And so just in terms of sort of those kind of accreditation schemes, what about the fair tax mark? Are you seeing kind of
The what? Sorry,
fair tax mark?
fair tax man.
Gilbert might have to explain a bit more about that.
It's just a gold standard for responsible tax conduct by operating businesses, essentially, and they can sign up to that accreditation.
Right.
Are we doing anything around that? Ultimately, do we know about it? If we don't know about it, could we know about it and do something about it? I mean, what's interesting about this is deciding on a kind of on a basic framework of basic behaviours from businesses. So it's like living wage employers would be one of those, and maybe signing up to the fair tax mark would be another. Agreeing shared outcomes and local economic sustainability, participation in community wealth building and local employment. So it's just, the question is just saying, we do it for living wage, and we think about doing it for the fair tax mark as well. So responsible tax behaviour.
Michael.
Off to you.
So firstly, on the fair tax mark, we're not that I'm aware of planning to do anything, but I know I have a connection who works there, so I can easily find out some more, share it, take some decisions over whether it's something we promote. But just what you were saying there about there's a list of emblematic and positive social actions that businesses could be taking. We kind of have an existing, I think it's called a toolkit on the Hackney Business Network. The content of it is sound, no problem with it. My reflection coming here, and it's a personal reflection, is that it's perhaps not strong enough. So some of the items you listed, it's more like a social charter for business. I'd be very interested in putting something together like that, and it would link to some of the strategic conversations with the large corporate businesses that we're talking about. Because quite often they say, "What's your ask?" They're actually quite direct and brutal, which actually confuses us sometimes, because we're used to being in the public sector and having a debate and consultation. But the kind of social charter would be something we could say, you know, these are the things that matter to us.
Yeah.
Where can we align? Where can we work together?
Right.
That is my personal opinion.
It's okay, Mike, I'm going to take you off this one. No, it's fine. What I do, just building on what Michael was saying, though, Councillor Narcross, in terms of the fair tax mark, what I think it's absolutely worth a discussion internally. What I do know from it, from my sort of wider sort of context, is that companies that receive it go through a very rigorous independent tax assessment of their status, and actually it's incumbent upon those organisations to do that.
Yeah.
And they have to do that. We'd obviously want our partners to be doing that, but it's incumbent upon them, with the right sort of steer and pressure. Absolutely, it's something we can think about. I wanted to mention more, though, that sort of wider context of how we are, I guess, trying to embed the principles and the objectives that the council, the mayor and cabinet, and you all have. And I want to mention the Hackney Apprenticeship Network. We have 173, I think, employers now within the network, and we are doing everything that we can to ensure that non-living wage and all the sort of social contract issues that Michael mentioned are embedded. But the benefit of the network, led by Councillor Williams, is that we are really putting as much pressure as we feasibly can on 173 enterprises in Hackney to do the same. And that's across the private sector, the public sector, the school sector, our Section 106 social value contracts, to really encourage and ensure that they're doing all they can. As Michael said, actually, in my experience, people are up for this, actually. So it's not, often it's an open door. So I think we can paint a picture of how things work, but I think with the right conversations, with the right relationships, it's really achievable if we are as pragmatic as we can be with our expectations, which are very high. So just want to make that point.
Right. Thank you. I know that Meg Hillier, MP, I know she's talked about it quite a bit before in terms of the tax mark. So
yeah, and I should have said that generally I think Meg Hillier has been incredibly helpful in all these discussions with government and business on our behalf as well. So thank you to her for that.
okay, over to Councillor Trevor for your question.
Thank you, Chair. Could I actually ask an additional question, which has come up as a result of the councillor's inquiry and Stephen and Michael's reply? We can get back to it. Okay, and that's around the idea of social charter and engaging with businesses on every level. We know that the London Living Wage is very welcome, but it's not necessarily not a gig economy with the London Living Wage. So it's additionally with the social charter that we're talking about, can we also, without commanding but encouraging, that those businesses do employ as much as possible away from carriers contracts and into holidays, sick pay, pensions and trade union recognition as well. And shall I let them answer and come back with my other question, because it's not direct.
Yeah, that's fine. Keep it separate.
Yes, absolutely. I think we can sort of take those points on, Councillor Primary. What I'd also say is that within our, for example, our Section 106 agreements, it's not just about London Living Wage. I say not just about, it's hugely important, but we have a very high benchmark for local employment and for and increasingly for workers from different sectors, and trade union representation is something that we all believe in very strongly, and we would encourage that. Clearly there are stipulations within contracts that are challenging, but in terms of a wider social contract sort of approach, as Michael said earlier, you know, we look to do as much as we can across the piece. Now, I'd be lying if I said that we could tick every single box out there, but what we will do is we will ensure that the biggest impact areas are the ones that we focus on at the moment, in terms of what we know about the economy, about our young people, and indeed our older people, in terms of work. And completely take the point around the gig economy. Sorry, that was a long answer. So I should have just said yes, really.
Yeah. I think, sorry, and just to build on, oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, sorry, thanks, Chair. And just to build really on Michael and Stephen's sort of comments, I think from a political perspective, Councillor Premier, I think that the Michael, for example, mentioned that there is a kind of I hesitate to call it charter. I think it was called a business toolkit.
Yeah.
You know, not quite as
Menu of opportunity.
yeah, or something, or menu of opportunity, or something like that. Anyway, it doesn't really matter what it was called, but it was of its time, and I think it was pre-pandemic, pre ourselves as an administration, and so on and so forth. And I think it's time for it to evolve and to kind of move forward. And I think you've described, you know, content that is more socially sensitive, as well as sort of being very alive to community wealth building, and goes back to the theme of the evening, but certainly to economic development, to the benefit of the employer as much as it is to the benefit of the employee. I think that's sort of really important. It's time to kind of take Michael's advice and leadership on this, and to kind of turn it from a toolkit into a charter. I think might be the best way of approaching it.
Okay, Councillor Primrose, do you want to ask your main question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's about the Way London, the GLA report into circular economy of work, job skills for London. I think it came out that July last year, and we have been discussing if we can discuss this in this or another meeting, not this particular meeting, but in our scrutiny commission in greater detail. And it's a really good report. It talks about up to potential for another 515,000 jobs in the circular economy, not just the really obvious ones in waste and so on, but all the supply chain, the skills and teaching and everything like that. So I suppose my question is, what does that mean for Hackney? And how do we tap in and think about the resources? How does that relate to what's going on in the GLA and that report? And then sort of related, and I'm sorry, it does cross over into Councillor Williams and other, you know, other briefs as well. I mean, I think something like a shocking £2 billion went back to the government, UK-wide, that wasn't spent on apprenticeships. I'm not saying anybody in the year, but just generally, that was underspent last year. And I was just wondering how we can how do we maximise the apprenticeship levy? And in particular, with regards to circular economy and the skills that we
Sure. Sorry, Chair. Sorry, Michael. Do you want to come in?
I'll do the levy, and Michael can start.
Maybe a good idea. Yeah.
Michael?
Turn that off, because I think it blocks me something on. Yeah, so just on the first one, I think so there's two dynamics. The London level reports are really useful for job opportunities for our residents, because not every resident will work in the borough. They'll go elsewhere. So I know the employment and skills team are looking at that information and trying to think through what it means. So it's the flow of, there's the opportunity in some kind of role somewhere, what's the skills and experience dynamic, and then try to link all of our provision, remember, try to link the system to help our residents get on that pathway of transition through. So I know the employment skills team are looking at that, but in terms of what it means for Hackney, the way that I've come at this is a bit different. So there were lots of reports on the jobs and skills opportunities, but all of those jobs and skills are in a business somewhere, and there's less information on that. So we've just kicked off a commission to kind of get a baseline for our green economy, and the circular economy is a subset of the green economy. It's the circularity aspect of it, and then with that baseline, we hope to just get a better picture. We've got some experimental data on this, so we're trying to validate that, see what it looks like in Hackney, see if there are any kind of clustering dynamics or certain kind of sectors. So is it creatives and makers? I suspect there'll be something of that. Will there be a textiles element? Potentially. And then when we've validated that, we'll do some qualitative work, so some interviews with those businesses about why they're here, see the future like, and then we'll try to adapt what we do in terms of our our business support, think about our space and buildings for move on, etc. And we'll start to kind of stitch that together to get the real answer of what does it mean for the Hackney economy. So we're just kicking off with the evidence on that. So we have, off the back of some of the grant work that was done in Hackney Central, we have a report from the PRD consultancy did to look at that. But it's quite, you know, a small baseline. I think there are 30 odd businesses engaged in circular economy activity, which is good, but we need to know more. Hackney Wick, there's some other activity around the creative enterprise zones, very much Hackney Wick and Fish Islands, so we've got a cluster emerging, more information coming through. Then when we've heard from those businesses, we'll know what the employment and skills dynamic is. So that's broadly, so it's the start of that journey now, but we'll get on it.
Thank you, Michael. Did you want to pick up on the levy side of things, Stephen?
Yeah, it'll be a relatively short answer, Chair. There are intensive discussions happening at the moment about how we ensure that we use up our surplus of our levy. As you'll be aware, Councillor Premru, the apprenticeship levy, there are stipulations about how you spend that. But what we are doing internally is working through how we can use that to upskill staff. So through CDQs, continuous development qualifications, particularly around areas that we know that are emerging. So both where there are skills gaps and where we know there's going to be a gap in the future. A clear example there would be the green economy. So the elegant way to do this would be to ensure that we're using the apprenticeship levy to ensure that we are training existing staff and new staff into new economy areas, that being one of them. And again, very happy to come back to talk about what we're doing in that space as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, and just to conclude, I mean, I think Michael leading on this work about analysis and just sort of kind of creating, if you like, the evidence base, kind of really will kind of be the guiding light in terms of sort of translating some of that kind of national context down to the Hackney context, or sorry, even regional context down to the Hackney context. And that work, sorry, when was it, Michael? So do you think in timetable wise?
So we'll have the report before the end of the financial year.
Right.
So could I follow on with a few questions then? So in terms of the report, so you mentioned back in June, I think, Councillor Nicholson, that there was a period of a few months where you were engaging with businesses to help define and shape what the circular economy, community wealth building, etc. was like. So is this kind of what we're talking about in terms of the evaluation? I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about how businesses have been engaged with, what types of businesses, you know, from the different areas in Hackney, etc., just to give a little bit of detail about that engagement would be great.
So we have a draft report which is specifically Hackney Central, which is
a pilot.
It was it emerged through our kind of grant funding activity, and there were a number of businesses that applied for grant, received grant for kind of circular economy type activity. So we bolted on small research study to that. So we've got the draft report now, so that's one element. I won't go into the detail, I want to just hold it back for the moment. We have just commissioned, and they're live with their field, the kind of borough-wide business survey that I talked about last time, where we'll get some quite high-level quantitative data, and that includes aspects of whether business is trading in the green economy, and also do they have net zero commitments? So they're actually two kind of separate things. In terms of my team's engagement with businesses, we had 2 sessions which were general business engagement sessions before Christmas, and we've just had one more last week, and we've got a stream kind of running through the rest of February and March, where it's me running workshops with businesses, primarily focusing on how is trading, What are your plans for the future? What does support look like? That might sound limiting, but we're keeping those sessions to 1 hour because we don't want to take too much of their time because we want to get client. So we'll have kind of more on that. I think, and I'm not that cited on this, has been further engagement through in environment. There's a team looking at circular economy, and they've been engaging through their networks. I don't know what they've discovered yet. I haven't touched base with them recently, but that's kind of a parallel work stream, and it will come together as we start to formalise the delivery planning for the climate action plan, which, as you know, is out. I think the consultation's closed now, but we just need to synthesise the results.
Okay, that's helpful. So the evaluation that's coming in March just relates to the specific work that you were leading on.
So the evaluation for the grant programme comes in March.
Yeah.
And the evidence-based work for the green economy baseline is March also. And the borough-wide business survey, which is related but slightly different, is also March. They're all March because of funding financial year and getting them done for them.
Okay, that's helpful. Councillor Smith, have you got a follow-on question to that?
That's okay, Chair.
Of course.
Yeah, just on the circular economy and the low carbon future and the climate action plan, because it's all big development, isn't it? So, designing out waste is a critical part of the circular economy. And I believe, are you doing some work with Be London in partnership? Maybe you are. I don't know. You can answer that.
Colleagues are.
Yeah. So Read London advocates for 5 circular business models. So the question is, what are we doing around this kind of work? So these business models are using stuff wisely, using stuff again, making things well, renting, not buying and sharing. So the question is, are we doing anything on those particular business models with businesses in that experimental area that you spoke about?
So the Hackney Central work wasn't a circular economy pilot.
It was one in Hackney Wick, wasn't it?
Well, so that's creative enterprise zone, but they will be naturally covering different aspects of the Re London 5. But I think in terms of our approach and Re London and those agendas, there's a commitment to hold Circular Economy and Green Skills Commission, or is it Green Skills and Circular Economy Commission? Whichever way around it is, and it would be useful if they're a little bit separate, actually, to be honest. But I think we need to explore that more. To be honest, it's an emergent area. We need to get our evidence sorted. We need to engage with Re London, I think, more to get kind of better intel and knowledge, and then embed the plan in the climate action plan delivery.
Yeah,
I mean,
so we're not there yet, to be honest.
and sorry, just kind of add. I mean, I think from an administration sort of perspective, Chair, I think this has always been a bit of a struggle, actually, which goes back to what Michael is doing in trying to hopefully provide definitions and understandings that can be more widely kind of embraced. Because at the moment, there are many people who would say that they are in the circular economy, they are a circular economy, and they're all doing very, very different things to different degrees and so on and so forth. And all of that is fine. It's clearly everything is evolving and it's all in transition. It's not bad stuff that in itself. It's just and hence the importance of the work that's going on. Just being able to bring and then at least we too can get an understanding from a kind of plan and policy making perspective, and then take it.
Stephen, did you want to answer?
Yeah, just Chair. I mean, there are some very sort of concrete examples of what we're doing in a resident-facing context as well in this space. I mean, the library things being a case in point. Clothes swaps, zero waste hub that we have in the borough, the furniture reuse scheme. So there's lots of things that are happening. And I think what would be useful for us is, and as an organisation, because this isn't directly our area, but is to apply Councillor Smith to the Re London 5 pillars as well, to ensure that we're sort of working that stuff through as well. So there is a lot of things happening.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just ask further? Oh, sorry, Michael, you've got something to add on this.
Well, just one final point. So there's examples that Stephen gave. There's an organisation or organisations facilitating those resident-facing elements, and that's where I see the kind of economic opportunity through behaviours changing, be it resident behaviours or other business behaviours. And then, you know, there's a place for an individual or an organisation to step in and do good. But you know, as we've said, it's emergent.
Stephen?
Sorry, Chair. Which,
Yeah,
no, I mean, you know, we talked about resident-facing stuff. Michael's alluded to the business-facing stuff. We are providing support and grants to organisations who are helping us do this as well. Batchworks being a case in point, where we are, they are developing a very hyper-localised sort of circular services model around reuse of plastic.
Yeah.
So it's not just about how we're working and supporting residents, it's actually going back to the original question around circular economies and community wealth building, how we are leveraging whatever opportunities we have to support businesses as well. So,
yeah, great. Okay. Can I just ask a further question about cooperatives? So obviously in terms of the conversation about community wealth building, so my understanding is when we spoke in June that you were kind of looking, and you did go into some detail about this in this meeting tonight in terms of, you know, cooperatives and the kind of half measures. And Stephen, I know you were talking about how complex it is, and it's obviously not quite the same position as Preston, for instance, because they're a unitary authority. So I just, in terms of the council adopting cooperative models and the council separately enabling cooperative businesses, I just wondered whether there's anything further that you might like to add on that at all.
I mean, I think certainly from the kind of conversations that are going on at the moment is to try and establish around, and indeed some of this through the engagement with the sustainable procurement strategy. Actually, it's to try and identify where there may be, if not market failure, then a market shortfall in terms of the supply side. This is within the context of the council forming cooperatives to try and sort of fill that gap. That work is in its very early stages, and I go back to our colleague Councillor Palace at the moment, who is very much involved in the conversation, you know, with myself, but also with Councillor Chapman and his sort of finance and procurement role within the cabinet. So that's one aspect of that, Chair, is just trying to identify where there is those sort of shortfalls, should we say, on the supply side. Now, in terms of the more wider brief around the kind of sort of, let's just call it the development of cooperative business models within the local economy, which aren't necessarily to do with the council at all. I mean, it's just sort of promoting that business model. The mayor's been very keen that the council joined up to the cooperative sort of business network. It's done that. It's very much sort of looking to a future, not just where it might be able to kind of form its own form of cooperatives in terms of supply side. Just as an example, actually, there is the energy company that is looking at transitioning. I've suggested to some colleagues that perhaps we need to be looking at the Hackney Housing Company as transitioning to a cooperative business model. Now, all of these are very kind of sort of early doors conversations. They're ideas. There's no real substance behind them as things currently stand, other than there's conversations are beginning and people are starting to look. So perhaps again, it's a sort of something the Commission may wish to kind of sort of look at in a few months' time or something, and just sort of revisit that, because I think it would be kind of helpful. I'm sure you're right if I say this, Stephen, helpful across the council. I think if that kind of conversation is being had. And there will be some areas where, you know, a cooperative business model just won't work. There may be a different type of social enterprise model of some description, but a cooperative one just might not work. But at the moment, it's very early to be able to kind of sort of say, oh, yes, there and here and so on and so forth.
Okay.
So, and Steve, just to add to that, Chair, we are part of the Cooperative Councils Innovation
We are.
Network as well, and I think that read across to community wealth building is really interesting and quite relevant and very helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Very helpful.
Just can I add on? No, of course. Just to follow on from that, are there any other examples from other councils within London that perhaps you're hearing about that we could perhaps learn from at all, or are we all in a similar kind of stage in terms of developing these ideas?
Yes, we've engaged with colleagues in Islington who have, I think it's called Cooperate Islington, which is a coalition of cooperative support organisations, not a cooperative development agency. We already have one of those in Hackney. And so we've engaged with the council and those organisations. It's an interesting story. It hasn't run its course yet, but there's definitely some lessons from it. So you know, on the face of it, they invested some of their kind of COVID support grant in that direction, but it wasn't enough to get enough traction to create the development agency. I think I engage with Hackney Cooperative Development quite a lot. There aren't actually that many active cooperatives in the borough. There's quite a long list of registered cooperatives, but they're not actives. And there's many more kind of social enterprises and KICs. So we've got about 600 in total. There might be some duplications. There might be around kind of 500. And we just want to refine that. I guess my challenge that I throw back is, I don't think it's just about cooperatives. I think they have their place, but it's about that general business model. And in fact, we're working with partners in Islington as the council, but the organisations there on one of these kind of sub-regional UK SPF bids. So it may not succeed, but it's kind of a useful exercise in getting to kind of know each other in that wider kind of landscape.
Thank you, Michael. Did you want to add, Stephen?
So I think as Michael used the word challenge, Chair, but I think there's an interesting sort of dynamic to all this, which is something that we need to consider corporately. And there's a really fantastic, I think, personally, again, this is a personal thing, commitment to insourcing within the organisation in terms of how we bring services in-house. We need to make sure that there's still the space for social enterprise or cooperatives or small businesses to be part of that economic ecosystem. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but I think that it's something that we need to work through as a political and organisational sort of body, really.
No, agreed.
Thank you.
Yes.
Another question you'd like to ask?
Yes, thank you. This is related to circular economy and definition, which you were referring a little earlier, which often, I think, kind of confuses or maybe communities struggle to understand its meaning, perhaps because of the evolving notion of it. I'm not sure if this is within your remit, but I'm noticing that there isn't a dedicated page of circular economy or to circular economy on the council's website. And hearing from tonight, there's a lot of initiatives, programs, models, consultations, engagements that is happening, but we don't see it on the website. And I would go just the last bit. I would go as far as saying that, given how important how we're working to to support climate and how important circular economy is for our climate, I think it gives a peace of mind as well in terms of mental health when we know as a community that actually our efforts are working. So it'd be really good to see on the website all of this, because it's a little buried within business. But from what I gathered tonight, there is loads happening. It'll be really good, proactive, something that we learn, and it's for organizations, and schools, businesses, and so on. It'll be really good. Yeah.
Okay.
Any thoughts on that?
Suggestion.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know quite what. Oh, sorry. Yeah. What I don't know, Councillor Turner, and I'll look to Michael, to perhaps just sort of advise us on this and perhaps respond in regards to just exactly what the mechanics have been about engagement with the business community and how that's come about and what lists and what approaches were made. But Michael, I mean, my understanding was that the Hackney Business Network was the kind of sort of one of the portals that were involved. But I don't know if you have anything further to add, just in regards to the mechanics of all of this consultation and how it was promoted. Sorry, with the business community. Or is that something that we should come back with?
Sorry, just before Michael comes in,
Yeah.
I think, sorry, Michael, but I think Councillor Sebelow's absolutely right. There's lots happening, and if you do a cursory Google search, it doesn't come up.
No, it doesn't.
And actually, there's something quite practical about me talking to Alid and my director colleagues about making sure that what we're doing, which is great stuff, actually, is there and visible. And I know that Alid and colleagues would absolutely want that to be there. So also we can talk to our web team and comms team. Sorry, that's quite a practical response. But you're absolutely right. You know, we could list now what's happening in this space, but it's not up there. So I will do that tomorrow. So that's a action actually for tomorrow. Yeah.
I think my concern, of course, is climate.
Yeah.
As a mental health champion, one of the things that we hear a lot is that there is a sense of distress when you think that all your efforts are going nowhere. But having that proof and that evidence, it will really be helpful. And also, the beginning of your message when we started the session today, explaining about business wealth, community wealth, and building that. That in itself is a great explanation that I don't think everyone has access to, and we don't know that is happening within our communities. So really good to have that.
Yes.
Thanks.
So in terms of the business consultation, our standard approach is to use Hackney Business Network. We're trying to kind of extend that list, and services have other contact sources as well. So one of the things we're talking about is what does a net zero partnership look like in the borough, and there'll be a circular kind of element to that. But I think your point about I think I'm understanding it. Engagement and knowledge in the community or at the community level, I think it comes a bit back to kind of definitions in the shared language. I think many people don't kind of associate with the language we're all talking around the table, sit at the table here, and I'd be interested to hear what would be useful for ward members to be able to speak in and with communities as representatives, as what do you need to help this? It's not much good me going into a community and having conversations because I'm not known and I wouldn't be trusted. But those who are the kind of trusted agents, it would be good to hear that. And then we can package the information up in a way that's understandable to help. Because the broader agenda, so going above and beyond the economy, if we're going to shift to net zero, it needs everybody to swing behind it, doesn't it? So we've got to understand it. And
we are doing a lot, Michael. I mean, that's the point. We're doing a lot of stuff. So yeah.
Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I think Councillor Turber, what I may suggest is that actually what we're trying to do at the moment is get, and officers are working on this, to try, as was said earlier, to try and get this definition before we start kind of sort of communicating more widely with residents as well as those local businesses, for example. And at the moment, we don't quite have that definition. So if I may suggest that actually you might just want to be looking, or the Commission may just want to look, Chair, at the forward plan a little bit and try and link it through, because those kind of definitions are going to start emerging in draft, at least, over the course of the spring and into the summer. So it's probably a good moment before going too live with what it is that we're all talking about, whether it be a circular economy or whatever it may be, community wealth building. Once we've kind of sort of brought together that definition and we're all feeling quite kind of comfortable and confident with that, and by all, I mean all of us, not just officers, then I think it is that conversation with the communications teams in the council to try and sort of be outward focused with it, both on the council's website, but Councillor Turber, I think the Hackney Business Network portal is also quite important, because I think communicating that to the network of businesses in the borough is obviously equally as important. But thank you. Thank you for kind of sort of tabling that. It's helpful.
Councillor Premaru.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, switch that on. Yeah, it kind of throws into a couple of other groups since we're doing the climate brief too, but along that sort of line of inquiry and with what we need to engage with the community. And we were talking before about some fantastic startups and various things that are doing circular economy work, like the Library of Things and so on, and this fixes. But thinking back to also the scope for those up to 500,000 jobs London-wide,
Yeah.
do we not need a huge change of commitment in terms of things like how people are trained to do repairs, which would fit in with not just our waste, but also the cost of living crisis, and would really be really valuable to the community on a very, very large scale, so that we're reducing our waste as we go, and with less going to the London Waste Authority and so on. And also that's education work, isn't it, around recycling and reducing as well. So if you could say, I know it's crossing over into other briefs, but the scope for it is enormous. We know how much more seriously affected by climate change year on year.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think the
future.
Sorry, thanks. Yeah, I mean, Councillor Premaru, I mean, I think that the reuse, recycle and upcycling kind of proposition, I think, is sort of really the thing that needs to be taken to heart across the economy, including those residents as well as local businesses, so across the wider community. I think that message is getting across. I think, Stephen, you touched upon just a few examples, only what, 3 or 4 examples, I think, of some kind of activities that are going on that are talking about reuse, they are talking about recycling, and they are delivering on the ground at the moment. There's some interesting statistics beginning to come back about what, for example, is going on with the Library of Things, certainly based in the Dalston Library campus down on Dalston Square there. It's sort of, but I think that it still has more to go, and I think that you're right about taking that message still further and wider. And sorry, Stephen, I don't know, did you have anything?
No,
anything to add? I mean, it's sort of that work is underway. I think colleagues, and Michael, you mentioned earlier about colleagues in environmental services who are looking at the kind of the circular economy piece. That's clearly going to provide you with more context, the context that we don't have at the minute. And all of that, I think, will focus in and be able to, and that's why I think it's probably a good idea to kind of reflect on the Commission's sort of work programme for the next municipal year, and just perhaps about bringing some of all of this work from these different parts of the council into one place at an appropriate time, and take it from there.
Councillor Swift.
Thank you. And Councillor Nicholson, you will have heard me speak about this before. I'll mention it again because we're talking about community wealth building. The idea, and don't be shaking in your boots, of a community bank, either for Hackney or across London. A bank that's based on the mutual model, owned by and run for the benefit of its members, rather than the maximisation of profits for shareholders. We know that banks are kind of closing all over the place. So a bank like this would facilitate local investment, enhance community wealth building by recirculating, as you mentioned before, savings into loans and preventing capital drain. I'm just putting it out there because it's an idea that I've been kind of thinking about for a long time. It's an idea I know that is sort of resisted because it's not going well in Preston, the one that they're trying to set up, but I know they're trying to set up another bank in Wales of a similar nature. I mean, there's a conversation to be had around the idea of just a general idea, broadly speaking, in our society about the value of community banks in local communities.
I mean, I think you're describing, is it the Bank of Dave in Burnley? Yeah. No, sorry, I mean that in a very positive way. Sorry, I don't mean it in a derogatory way. You know, which kind of relied upon a kind of a local businessman who had, you know, sort of made considerable kind of sort of profit out of, I think it was a van dealership, actually, I think is what he was doing. Yeah, it was indeed. That then he went on to kind of sort of develop that, I'm going to call it that community bank model, and ultimately ending up with the kind of appropriate accreditation to open up said community bank, which I think is very, very compelling indeed. And I think that, you know, when we look to the local credit union, perhaps that's a platform in which we could explore further with them. Equally, I think finding that capital or finding a third party with that capital to come along and perhaps establish a model similar to the community bank, i.e. the Bank of Dave, I think is a great objective. Where we would find that individual, I'm not sure, but it's certainly worth trying. It's certainly worth trying. I'm not sure that the council is best placed to become a banker of choice for a community.
Talk to Ian.
Yes. We could always drop a note to the director of finance, but I think we can probably suspect what the response would be. But no, the intention is there. But perhaps it may be a case, Councillor Smith, that just sort of looking at the credit union and having that kind of conversation and just brokering that kind of meeting with them and just seeing how far could things possibly go using that as the model, as the basis, as a starting point. That's all. Sorry, I'm thinking of ideas there. That was something.
No, this is a sorry. It's a really interesting discussion actually, and I think Councillor Smith, there are huge advantages in theory of a community bank. Personalised services, local focus, supporting local businesses, whatever it might be. But you know, there are, and it really speaks to that sort of wider point. But I guess there are also challenges. So you've got limited services. You've probably got limited branch locations. You've sort of got lack of technology. So again, it's a sort of balance, isn't it, between what it is that wider sort of objective is. As Councillor Nicholson said, it's probably not for us to do. But a whole range of sort of fiduciary and other sort of requirements. But I think in terms of the aspiration, it's absolutely something that is embedded within our thinking around what we're trying to do with local businesses. So one to watch, I suppose.
And community wealth.
Yeah,
so in its wider sense. Yeah.
Councillor Smith, you'd like to add something?
Just very, very, very briefly, because I know that we've been there's talk about the kind of the post office bank in this country, and I know in Germany they have Sparkassen, kind of similar kind of idea around community banks. There's lots of learning from Germany to be done on this as well. I mean, I'm talking about not necessarily just in Hackney, but just a broader conversation starting with us, starting here, and then moving out to the boroughs and moving out to the countries. It's already happening in Preston, it's happening in Wales. So these conversations are happening. But, organisations like ourselves have to get behind those conversations. It's just a conversation at the moment, really. But I think we have a duty to get behind them, really, I think.
Okay. I think we'll kind of draw an end to this item unless anybody's got more questions. I just would like to ask, you've talked about the Commission for Green Skills and Circular Economy, if I've got that the right way round. I wondered if you could expand a little bit on who's a member of that currently, how many times you've met, your kind of initial remit for that, well, apart from the obvious title. You kind of plan for that commission.
It was sorry, I think it was a manifesto commitment, Chair.
Right.
Or what one?
Sorry, Chair, do you want to turn your...
Councillor, that's Councillor Smith.
Actually, I can do this, can't I? Clear.
No.
Sorry, it was a manifesto commitment, which, as far as I'm aware, has not yet been formed. Am I correct?
You're correct, Councillor Nixon. However, I had a conversation probably about 4 hours ago with Dujon Harvey, Head of Employment Skills and Outlearning, where we discussed the Commission, and we'll be working through the proposals ASAP and report back to you probably via Tracy out of session, if that's helpful.
Yes, it is. So, but you do anticipate getting it up and running quite soon, then, is that?
It's absolutely something that we want to get up and running ASAP.
Okay, great. Well, that's
Yeah.
really, really good to hear. It'd be good to hear more about the work. Okay, unless anybody's got any questions, I'd just like to say that's really useful. You've given us a lot of useful information about how you're progressing these items. We realise that it's quite complex. It's quite a big shift, and you're kind of you're in the exploratory stage of kind of going through a lot of these ideas. So we will look forward to further updates, and it's quite useful for the suggestions you made as well about further work that the scrutiny can. I know that Tracy's made a note of all of those. Yeah, so thank you very much for your.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Chair.
Jeff. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Specifically to Councillor Nicholson, because it was your
Sorry.
time. No, it's specifically to you, but also officers who were
Team effort.
Michael and Stephen.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
No, thank you.
A couple of minutes just to get your stuff together.
Done.
Nice to see you in real life.
Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so item 5, attached to the draft minutes for the meeting of 2022, pages 9 to 36. Please can I ask that members agree minutes. Already heard how detailed they are.
Yeah.
Comments? We agree?
Very good.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yeah, just commend the minute taker for their really extremely comprehensive and valuable. Thank you.
So we'd like to note that in these meeting minutes. Okay, so item 6. Okay, this is about the work programme. So the work programme for the Scrutiny Commission is outlined on pages 37 to 50 of the agenda. Please note that this is a working document and regularly updated for each meeting. Okay, so an update on the work programme. For the next meeting on the 8th of March, the Cabinet question time session will focus on the new Green Deal. The second bullet point on climate change has been moved to the new municipal year and will be in July's meeting date. Which will be confirmed when we've got the new council calendar. Councillor Race.
Thank you. Obviously, the next cabinet member is Mette Coburn, and we've asked to fit in the economic impacts of LTMs. So would that be an appropriate time to
Yeah, that'd be fine.
I think you pick it up there, yeah.
especially given that we've had the latest announcement for the rest of the LTMs in the last sort of 3 weeks. So if we could add that to his agenda, that would be great.
Can we contact Councillor just to note that? Really good.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll do that. I'll add it to what he's already got.
Thanks.
Councillor Race, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that. So, Councillor Billington has noted the following items from the previous work programme discussions that are currently pending. So we've also talked about the GLA report, which you mentioned tonight, Councillor Pembroke. I think we need to go through and read through that document a little bit more thoroughly, and then we can think about where it slots in, whether we have a standalone item, perhaps in the new municipal year. We can certainly draw out elements for Councillor Williams' session and possibly Councillor Caban's, but definitely Councillor Williams. In terms of the voluntary sector request by Councillor Walker, again, we want it to be a substantive item because we think, we need to do a good piece on that. So again, we suggest that's going to be for the new municipal year in either June or July. So the other suggestion by Councillor Smith was about sustainability and licensing, which was how do we use our powers in licensing to drive SME behaviours. This is proposed again for June or July. So do members, outside of what I've just said, and councillor basically suggestions, do members have any other suggestions for the work programme? Councillor Turbo-Tulla.
Yes, I just have a small suggestion based on experience from other scrutiny commissions. For example, with the voluntary sector item, which will come in a new municipal year,
Yeah.
it would be good as well, perhaps, for the commission to visit and speak, perhaps directly with the voluntary sector. I know that in other communities we have had visits, but we're going to speak to if we're going to have an item that we're going to discuss, or we're going to be scrutiny. It'd be good to have also on the ground, and communities.
We can certainly have a think about that.
Yes, to also do that. So it also has we are better equipped, I think, also to raise the questions that we want to bring to the commission.
I mean, this scrutiny commission certainly has visited, say, businesses before, and that's that has been particular. So we'll have to think about exactly what we want from that session, and who we want to speak to, and then we can take it from there. And if it is right, then a visit would help us, and I think that's something that we can look at.
I'm bringing you, so I'm sure you've done it before.
No, I just wanted to really assure you that if it is relevant, then we will. That's good to be reminded. Any other comments? Okay. Item 7, any other business? I haven't been notified of any other business, so I think I can now formally declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy.
We finished early.